Alright, well we got two up to one, so we might make a start. There was some confusion with the room booking, but that's not unusual for our seminar series. At the start of the semester we're never quite sure which room we're going to be in, 302 or 303. But the good news is they're right next door, so if anyone comes to next door they'll find us here. So I'll start by welcoming the group, welcoming everyone to the History Research Seminar Series for second semester. We're now in our third or fourth week of the research program, and it's been an excellent seminar series so far. I'll also begin by acknowledging the land, the traditional land and custodians of the land that we're meeting, the Jagera and Turrbal people. It is a great pleasure to get fellow researchers who bring extra strength and diversity to the history program. We've never been a strong department here for Central and South American history, and so it is wonderful to have a number of researchers, including Robert Austin, who is an honorary within our school, to contribute a seminar paper. So today we are welcoming Dr. Vladimir Pacheco, Dr. Graham Bolton, and Dr. Robert Austin to provide a summary of their research and insight into some of the larger themes around the 40th anniversary of the fall of the Allende government in Chile. The paper is entitled Unhappy 40th, Australia and the Political Economy of Terror in Chile, 1973 to 2013. And Robert.
Thanks, Jeffrey, and thank you so much for the introduction. Welcome, friends, compañeras, compañeros, and to whoever may be here for ASIO. You know what it is. We would like to thank a number of people who've contributed to this work. It's actually work Graham and I started up 6 years ago. We very much would like to thank them by one. We think that the reasons will become obvious as the session unfolds. Most of them still have careers in front of them. Graham and myself published, or an article of ours was published about 4 years ago now in a Brazilian journal called Was There a Chilean Holocaust? That was our first exploration of this theme. And in that we demonstrate that the official statistics of the Fortieth Commission, that was the commission set up in the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation mode, similar to what had happened in South Africa, for example, that the Fortieth Commission has almost certainly understated the deaths caused by the dictatorship by a factor of around 6. The official figure is approximately 3,500. Our figure is in the order of 20,000. And sadly, I have to report ours is proving with each month that goes by, each year that goes by, somewhat closer to the target. And we want to dedicate the forum to those who aren't here, in particular the Chilean resistance and its members who chose, when confronted with the fight or flight option, to stand and deliver. It's little wonder in our view then that the probably best known song about the Chilean resistance is by the Cuban singer Pablo Milanés, Cold War Streets Again. In summary, very quickly, what made popular unity and what made the Chilean state a target for imperialism, and some quick remarks about that. It'll be dealt with in more detail by Graham and Vladimir on the economic level. But culturally, politically and economically, here's a quick summary. In just 3 years, the enrolments of women in universities tripled. Illiteracy reduction doubled. Bilingual education was reduced for the Mapuche people, Chile's largest indigenous population, and the only successful indigenous group to resist Spanish colonialism, the only group which fought the Spanish to a standstill and came to a truce with the Spanish in around 1880. I'm sorry, 1780. Copper was nationalised and the profits handed over to major public projects. Housing construction boomed. There was an agrarian reform dedicated to the peasants and not to the feudal landowners. Income redistribution was dramatic and favoured the poor considerably. Popular culture blossomed. One only has to think of names like Inti Dimani, Kilabayun, Pablo Neruda, the Pavas, and so on. The state publishing house, Kimantu, published 5 million books in 2.5 years, which doubled what had been produced in the previous 70 years in a population of only 10 million. 5 million books in 2.5 years. And banking, of course, was nationalised to serve all Chileans and not only the elites. Allende, by the way, and the Unity had drawn up a new constitution which was going to abolish the dual chamber arrangement and have a popular assembly, much along the lines of what is now running in Venezuela. And he was due to announce that oversight on the 11th of September 1973. Now, if you look at the statistics of the 1970 election, where the Christian Democrats stood against Allende's Popular Unity, a left Christian Democrat, Tomic, the candidate who lost, not by all that much, by the way, later argued that if one took the view that it was a project that people were voting on, a project for a social democracy leading into a socialist society, then the real vote for Popular Unity was in the order of 65 to 70%. That is to say, summing both Tomic's and Allende's votes. We need to remember also in that figure, and this indeed is the subject in somewhat broader terms of one of my books, called The State Literacy and Popular Education in Chile, 64 to 90, that the previous president, Frei Montalva, or Frei I as we know him, Frei I refused to enfranchise illiterates. And had illiterates been franchised, there had been a further 12 to 15% of votes in play, and one makes one's own decision about what poverty-stricken illiterates are likely to do, but there was a reasonable chance that at least some of that votation would have gone for Allende. There are in our view, two enduring elements of the post-coup historical landscape which warrant attention. The first is the imposition and the development of the terrorist state, in tandem with the ascendancy of a fascism which is aligned to Francoism. Professor Jaime Guzman from the Catholic University was the intellectual author of the fascist ideology of the dictatorship. He, in his works, openly acknowledges the positive influence on his thinking of the Franco ideology. And secondly, the parallel implementation, then maturing, of the neoliberal economic model. The former is a precondition of the latter. That is, the dictatorship's neoliberal economy was only possible once the terrorist state had been established. They are interlinked, they're interdependent. And this particular process, this interdependency, if you like, was soon consolidated by the global reach of Operation Condor, which I'll come back to discuss briefly. Australia's support for military sedition and then corporate exploitation of Chile might best be understood in three phases. Firstly, ideological, from 1970 to 1980. And this includes, somewhat lesser known than one might think, the Whitlam government's support for the dictatorship. Whitlam came out and recognised the dictatorship in October 1973, less than a month after it had taken place, despite great rumblings within the ALP government. Secondly, there's a low-intensity economic imperialist phase from 1980 to 1990. That's, if you like, the second and last dictatorship decade. And finally, the current phase of a gradually developing political economic integration with the hyper-exposed Chilean economy there and vulnerable to penetration from global corporations. We say something in the paper about the dramatic rise in Chilean migration to Australia after the coup. And there's some discussion about the composition of immigrants to Australia and their political tendencies, and our estimation, in particular Viviana Ramirez and myself have done quite a lot of work on this, is that approximately 1/3 of those who came out to between 1973 and 1990 were genuine political refugees and had a genuine reason to get away from dictatorship, and the other 2/3 were a mixture of those that look at horizons, economic refugees, and that category. But there's also some question mark over precisely accurate statistics, because it's undeniable that a figure perhaps in the many hundreds at least of Chileans who came here simply took on another identity. They assumed a new identity and agreed never to meet again. There are legendary and legendary tales about them. We deal, going right back into the 19th century, with Australian imperialism. Not words that you hear together all that often, but there's nevertheless a very strong history and a strongly growing body of evidence to that effect. We argue that the empire, if you like, the Australian Empire, begins in earnest when Britain transfers its colony of Papua New Guinea to Australia in the early 20th century. And we deal with the rise of the Labor Party in that context, and then go to Menzies. Menzies, that symbol of the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy, who wept uncontrollably in Parliament when informed that King George VI had died, you may remember, was Prime Minister from 39 to 41 and 49 to 66. And it was on his second watch that both ASIO and ASIS are born. They're both illegitimate children. They had no constitutional approval. There was nothing in the Constitution which permitted Menzies, or Chifley before him, who set up ASIO with a simple stroke of a pen and directive. As the barrister, constitutional lawyer Mick Tullis has pointed out in his book on ASIO, there's simply nothing in the Constitution that permitted their formation. Australia, through ASIS and ASIO, very rapidly becomes integrated with UK-USA. It stands for the UK, United States, Australia, and somehow or other Canada and New Zealand espionage services, which are integrated very rapidly in the context of the Cold War. The terrorist state. This, it seems to us, is critical to understand if we're to understand what's going on now and what has gone on in Latin America since the early part of the post-war period, and in particular the 1970s in Chile. Terrorist states in post-war Latin America in general, and Chile in particular, synthesise two historical processes. First, the legacy of the semi-feudal state developed by Spanish colonialism from the time of the Catholic military invasion of 1492 up to about the time of the wars of the early 19th century, the wars of independence or semi-independence, if you like. That's between approximately 1810 and 1826. Every Latin American republic is liberated from the Spanish, but goes under the yoke very rapidly of European and North American neocolonialism, with the exceptions of Puerto Rico and Cuba. And to ensure post-war economic dominance, the United States sets up a network of military training organisations, and these are critical if we're to understand how the terrorist state functions. It's a network which includes the School of the Americas in Panama, Arca's School of the Assassins, which was repackaged after Panama kicked it out in 1984 as the Western Hemispheric Institute for Security Cooperation in Fort Benning, but it still uses the same manuals to train torturers and assassins. The Office for Police Training, the Military Assistance Program called MAP, the International Military Education and Training Program called IMET, and the Conference of American Armies, as well as a series of links to national military academies. And they're integrated from within with the CIA, with the United States Information Agency, and the US Southern Command, SOUTHCOM. If you see a map of the world according to the US military, the world is divided into hemispherical influence areas. There are now 7. AFRICOM is the latest one. SOUTHCOM is the one out of which the terrorist state is coordinated. the Pentagon actually gave a massively advanced computer to Operation Condor in the early 70s that ran out of and continues to run out of that area. So the modern Latin American terrorist state is configured around a series of characteristics within the late capitalist paradigm. Paramilitary death squads, state-of-art armaments and military technology, disproportionately high military budgets, the presence of state-supported fascist civic organisations like Patria y Libertad in the case of Chile, extraterritorial abductions and executions, cross-border and overseas. Sometimes these are subcontracted to ultra-right groups, as they were in the case of the assassination of the former Chilean Foreign Minister Orlando Letelier in Washington on Embassy Row in 1976. That was carried out by Cuban expatriates under the direction of one Michael Townley, a CIA operative married to a member of the Chilean secret police named Mariana Callejas. And along with this goes the doctrine of national security, the notion that the enemy is within and that there's every legitimacy in the state handing over massive resources to the armed forces to attack that enemy. So this becomes the pretext for the up to 20,000 deaths in Chile's case under the dictatorship. Operation Condor is the international expression of this operation against the enemy within. Operation Condor is initiated by the director of the Chilean Secret Police, the DINA, in 1975. There's a meeting in Santiago of the military chiefs of Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and Uruguay. And we detailed the development there of Operation Condor. It lasted for almost 2 decades, and our view is that it quite possibly had carried out one execution and 2 major injuries on Australian soil. ASIS, very briefly, the Australian Security Intelligence, Secret Intelligence Service. I've mentioned its birth. It was certainly very strongly influenced by ultra-right thinking, and it ran at the invitation of the CIA, 3 agents in Santiago from early 1972, but the arrangements were put in place between the CIA and ASIS from November 1970. So within 2 months of Allende's election, the CIA, through the UCUSA arrangements, brings ASIS in because it's afraid that Allende will expel the CIA and it needs to have officers on the ground running its own unidentifiable staff there. It's successful in doing that, and in fact, despite some very well rewritten history suggesting that Whitlam got annoyed, sacked the ASIS director and the ASA director not long afterwards, called the agents home and all was well, it turns out they stayed on. Clyde Cameron later confirmed that in a letter which will be discussed, I gather, in a program on SBS on the 11th of September. And so ASIS stays on, and I'd like to finish by just giving you a taste of the sorts of things which ASIS and the sister organisation or brother organisation ASIO are up to. MI5, MI6, FBI, CIA, ASIS, ASIO. They're 2 sides of the same coin. I actually began writing this part under the title 11 Theses on ASIS, but have only 10. The principal work that's been done outside of Latin America, I think you appreciate that if people are doing it inside Latin America. I've been working on it myself there for 20 years and had my life threatened twice during that time. I've been attacked once in Chile last year. The most outstanding work, particularly in the English language, done so far is by Patricia McSherry, who's written a brilliant book on Operation Condor. Her partner, by the way, is a Salvadorian refugee who just survived the death squads. There are varied examples of what we think can only point to ASIS and ASIO cooperation with Operation Condor in Australia. And I need to read just one quick section to you. In view of ASIS's collaboration with the CIA and CIA sponsorship of Operation Condor, it's a reasonable supposition that ASIS was linked in some way to the powerful nerve centre run by Southcom, quite probably via Pine Gap, the spy centre run in Australia by the CIA since, I believe, the late 60s. So the circumstantial evidence points towards ASIS, ASIO and Condor being involved in a number of instances, and I'll give you a taste of these now. Firstly, in 1976, a certain Premier Joe Viljoki-Peterson provided the Fraser government with a list of 44 Chilean exiles who, he argued, were, and I quote, highly dangerous and should be returned to their country. So these exiles should be returned to the dictatorship. The Queensland Police's famous special branch had compiled the list, basing its assessment on their terrorist potential, in inverted commas, on surveillance that the people on the list had affixed posters about the visit of the assassinated Chilean singer Victor Jara's widow to Brisbane to a fundraiser. Secondly, Southern Cone exiles, and some of this research is my own and Viviana Ramirez says others is from various people around the country who are happy to remain anonymous, suggest that under the special humanitarian program from 1981, a number of former Chilean secret police have come to Australia and been able to stay. Thirdly, a number of these people, and one doesn't always take oral history as an objective scientific establishment of reality, and one has to be very careful. There are, as I'm sure my much more experienced colleague Jeff can tell us, serious restraints on oral history as a source. So applying those serious restraints, there's still quite credible evidence about a number of persistent death threats being made to significant figures in the Chilean community, men and women. Fourthly, there have been two suspicious fires in Sydney at the Latin American, ¿cómo se llama este lugar? Casa Latina in Marrickville. There have been two suspicious fires in the 90s, and despite the police investigation where the venue was destroyed.
It was burnt down a couple of years ago.
I'm sorry?
It was burnt down a couple of years ago.
Again, that is the third. Thank you for bringing this up today. So there are now three fires that are unexplained and which have destroyed venues which are very well known for all of them, Latin American solidarity groups, but also in particular the Chile group. Fifthly, solidarity participants have recognised or uncovered ASIO, State Special Branch Police, and some Operation Condor countries' agents at varied solidarity activities. For instance, in Brisbane, Uruguayan members of the Chile Solidarity Committee recognised a former military torturer at a public meeting, and he was expelled from it in 1985. Sixth, there's the well-known case of Sergio Bushman. Sergio Bushman was a senior figure in the Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front. The Manuel Rodriguez Patriotic Front decided on armed resistance against the dictatorship when, in very crude summary form, they'd had enough and decided that in order to restore Chilean democracy, they must take up arms and fight. Bushman came to Australia in the late 1980s to raise money for the FPMR and was almost whisked back to Chile through Interpol. He was gotten back as far as Canada or Alaska, I think, and somehow or other pulled out by international protest and allowed to go back to exile in Sweden. There's a question of ASIO phone taps. We've had our own confirmed by the former Labor Minister John Kira. He ran tests when we lived in his electorate of Werriwa in Sydney and showed that our house had been burgled but nothing stolen. All of our Chile Solidarity files had been rifled and were left all over the floor, and our phone had been tapped but nothing was stolen. And these are plainly messages. These are there not to say welcome to the Werriwa electorate. Eighth, In the same year in which the fascist ex-dictator was detained in London pursuant to the Spanish judiciary's crimes against humanity search, a former bodyguard of Pinochet appealed the Labor government denial of permanent residence to the federal court in Australia. This is the case of Demetrio Gonzalez. I was involved in providing evidence to the federal court, and the question that I had to answer via a third party was what was the probability that a former bodyguard of General Pinochet was a torturer? And I'll leave you to imagine that my answer was fairly categorically, of course, yes. Ninth, in the early 1990s, the Chilean media published a list of around 1,000 secret police, largely officials of the DINA, the initial name of the Chilean secret police. It morphed and became the CNI and DINA, but it was one and the same thing, who were either preparing to emigrate to Australia or had already emigrated. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. Not everyone on the 1,000 list was coming to Australia. They were wanting to emigrate. Emigrate was, we believe, quite probably an official description of them simply going around the world to monitor what was happening and perhaps be involved in further espionage and so on. 2 were stopped from coming to Australia by protests from the Chilean community. 10th, I've just got the 11th. 10th, on New Year's Day, 1982, in Sydney, in a back street of Strathfield, after a New Year's Eve party, 3 major solidarity figures were standing in the street waiting for a taxi. One was the senior Uruguayan Communist Party figure, possibly Isabel. I can't remember, I'm sorry. I'll remember it shortly. A Uruguayan senior figure. The second was the Cuban consul in Australia. The third was a senior exile from Colombia. Out of nowhere, a car appears, wipes the 3 of them off the street. The Uruguayan dies immediately. The Cuban stays in hospital for months. The Colombian is a permanent cripple. The executioner, forgive my jumping to that conclusion, spends 5 months in jail and leaves. And there is subsequent contact with the family, and I'll go no further, but you can imagine, you might like to paint this out yourselves and imagine what is more than likely involved. Finally, next week, on the 11th of September, SBS is, I gather, running a TV and a radio documentary in relation to the significance of the 40th anniversary. And we've been approached to contribute to that, by the way. In the process, we've received an email from SBS, which reads in part, my report, that's to be televised, is now in the legal department of SBS because ASIS sent me a strong advice that if I disclose some confidential information I hold, I would be at risk of prosecution. So we are working out how to say the most without being at risk. So what we'll see will be censored. Thanks for your patience, and Rain and
This one, because we don't use it, is flat. Have a look. They said to me it's flat because you open it. And you see?
Well, thanks everyone. First got my interest in what was happening in Chile when I was there after the coup. The rest of them kicked out. One of my friends was arrested in southern Chile, taken to the border of Argentina and dumped in the middle of winter. Eventually released him. cold. People have been dumped in the desert and just disappeared, put down officially as being unnatural causes. People just go, I was dumped in the desert and made my way through Indians from Bolivia smuggling stuff going to be linked into Peru. I could see it firsthand exactly what was happening. It wasn't what the press was really saying, something was quite different. And things that, take for example, in 2008, you had Professor Niall Ferguson, did his program of Centre Money. And he praised Chile, it's a great economic miracle. And thanks to Pinochet, they got rid of this Marxist government. And we had a few thousand killed, but look at this great achievement. And it's around some big department store or arcade. This is a great Chilean achievement. The year before, the Canadian journalist had written a book called Shock Doctrine, also looked at Chile, but rather than painting it as its glorious achievement, said, well, how can it be that the only way you can do shock therapy and this type of neoliberalism is if you actually have to kill people to implement it? So is Ferguson correct in saying it's a glorious achievement? Obviously for the rich it was. Or Klein is correct in saying, well, for the poor, it really was a dreadful period. And just very briefly, Australia's connection with Chile goes back to First Fleet. The First Fleet running out of wheat, they went over to Chile, got wheat, brought it back. In the 1830s, a former president had escaped from, kicked out of Chile, came to Australia as a refugee, they went back. The first Labour Prime Minister in Australia was Chilean. The first Premier of South Australia was Chilean. So we had this long history of Australia and Chile. The clipper ships bringing across wheat and other products between Australia and west coast of Latin America existed to the 1930s, so there was very strong economic tie. And this tie again re-established by the 1980s. And look at what Pinochet was doing after the coup. It was a complete mess. So what happened is that Milton Friedman had given a talk and then advised Pinochet on how to establish the neoliberalism, shock therapy and Chicago School economics theory. So it all goes back to Hayek, an Austrian school of economics. He went over to Chicago, set up the school of economics there. He had Milton Friedman was there. One of his students was Andre Gunder Frank. Frank could see what they were trying to do, came to Chile and became an advisor for the Allende government, saying don't take on this type of Chicago School of economics theory. It's just bad. But the Country School of Economics had been set up with the economics department through the Ford Foundation, Chicago Economics, establishing this idea of Chicago School of economic theory was correct. So in 1975, Pinochet adapted this Chicago School of Economics as part of its economic approach. But rather than achieving anything substantial, unemployment greatly increased. Foreign debt greatly increased. So banks went bankrupt, had to bail out the financial sector between 1975 and 1980. Disaster. They had no anti-dumping legislation. None. Bankruptcy skyrocketed. The Asian countries are dumping their goods in Chile. There's nothing to stop them. So what used to be fairly thriving companies just collapsed. Complete mess. And then again between 85 and 89 was the second lot of companies being privatised. Let's see this one here. So here's the first wave. You see what they're trying to get rid of is not just the junk, but the crown jewels of state ownership. Because you want to prove, one, that the theory works, you get rid of good stuff, and two, you put it in private hands. And in Chile, who really had money to buy shares in these companies or buy up these companies? Just a few dozen families. There's a lot of poverty here. And you see what they're going through. They're going through chemical companies, through mines, through life insurance, telephones, etc., have all been privatised. Not too sure how to get back. How do you get back to this? I'm going to go back to the beginning. Yeah, so here's a second wave comes in. And again, it's really high class companies, plus a lot of farms have been sold off. Remember, these aren't sold at the top prices because who's going to buy this? Is military, the rich in Chile? Or do people have got the money for this? So I used to work for BHP as a geologist. In 1985, Utah International decided to get rid of its foreign assets. So BHP bought up Utah International, bought a coal company up here. Complete disaster, overpaid. But part of the thing that they also had was a 37% share in Escondida, the big copper mine in Chile. So here's the BHP, Australia's biggest company, was getting involved in the Chilean mining industry. And gradually, by 1990, it had basically controlled Escondida. Spent $1 billion buying up more and more shares. There's a strike on at the moment, I think, at the moment, Escondida. Well, the first thing BHP did was start sacking off lots of people, hundreds and hundreds of people. Western Mining was also an Australian company and had parts of interest in Escondida. It had a really bad reputation to do with indigenous rights in Australia. Of course, the same thing happened in Chile, as did BHP at that time. I was working while the general manager of my section was referring to Aboriginal rights as this kind of great big bunyip hiding in the ground somewhere. That's the way he referred to kind of Aboriginal religious rights. And then comes Alan Bond. Alan Bond's big, Waltons, he had a few companies here. He bought a 727 and flew his staff plus the security guards to Chile. They buy the plane to show them all over there. And the reason why he started buying up companies in Chile is because of low tax. Because the deal he had done, special agreement with Pinochet. So he gets into CTC by 35% of it, and then keeps on buying up more and more. Chile has 51% control, which is illegal under Chilean law. Now, he had an agreement with Pinochet which allowed that. He's guaranteed 12% profit by the Pinochet government, 153% dividends. Sold for $500 million to the Spanish company. Bond also connected with DINA because it enabled the better surveillance, more modern equipment, using anti-labor legislation, etc. Allende deposits, the history there. 87, he acquires controlling interest and sells it in Canadians, making lots of money. It changes the name around Indio to San Jose, even though San Jose, because a few years ago, that mining disaster. Bond returns from Chile to Australia, big mass demonstrations. Even Hawke's old pal wouldn't shake his hand in public. His Bond corporations are declared bankrupt. He has to go to jail for 3 years and 7 years for stripping down resources. Someone in jail kept trying to cut his throat, still got the scar there. In the year 2000, he was released, went to London, bought a big hunk of Lesotho Diamond Corporation. He's supposed to be bankrupt. and now one of the richest men in Australia. Peter Holding from Lake says this in The Age, 1998. If Australia's stated commitment to human rights is to be taken seriously, the issue of relations between Australian transnationals and aggressive regimes cannot be overlooked. In relation to the bond investments in Chile, one is compelled to conclude that the Pinochet regime ranks among the world's most repressive governments. If Australia is going to buy up companies in Chile, they were supporting the Pinochet's repressive government. There's absolutely no way they did not know what was happening. And even in much more democratic governments afterwards, Australia has a very big connection with Chile. Queensland Rails making locomotives for Chile, electronics, Qantas, and then Chile agreements, BHP Minerals, etc. Massive investments. But the main thing I want to stress is that by Australian companies going in there at this period, maybe 5 onwards, despite that, from 1987-88, Chile was removed from preferences. So US companies weren't investing in there. Australia did. That's a really important thing to remember. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everybody. I hope I can send you to sleep. I'm going to show you a whole lot of numbers, so hopefully you'll stay awake. So what I wanted to talk about is because Brian referred to that period, you know, a lot of people referring to the Pinochet regime's economic policies as successful. So what I'd like to do is a number of things. One is to show that that's not true. The other as well is that I'd like to show you a little bit how the period of the concertación, it's just a continuation of the economic policies. In other words, there is no longer a repressive regime, but the neoliberal policies still stay in place. So they got rid of the horrible element, but left the the economic element. So in this table you can see there it's a GDP, the gross domestic product, and you can see in the period there from that's the Allende period. If you just scan through the figures, you will see that Chile's GDP averages between 3 to 4%. Even if you go back to the 1920s, there's a couple of exceptions there in the 25-32 period, -6 because of the global depression, and then a period of extraordinary growth at 11%. But that's because it's coming from a low base going up. But if you look as a whole, you will see that the average growth rate is about 3 to 4%. So this period here, again, is falls within that average. The one that doesn't fit that average is the Pinochet regime's economic performance, the 2.5%. It's dismal if you compare it to the rest of the history there. So it's the lowest in the 71-year period from 38 to 2009. So just looking at that figure, it shows that it wasn't doing so well. Despite all the problems that Allende had, that is decent. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about the concertación period of 5% later. And this is just another way of putting it, using the manufacturing production index. This index measures the manufacturing side of things, not so much the extraction of resources like mining and that, but products that are made, manufacturing in Chile. And you can see there, it's going at the top, slowly increases, 130, 137, 146. Then we have the period there of Allende, 150. So this figure continues to increase. And then it drops, 1975. Big drop to 118. And then it doesn't pick up until 1985. So basically what that is telling you is that industrial production in Chile was relegated. They were not producing any manufacturing, or very little manufacturing. So basically what they were doing is what Pinochet was using mining, basically just extraction of resources is the easiest way to maintain your economy. And the reason why you can do that in a country like Chile is because you cannot talk about Chilean economics without talking about copper. It's basically the copper producer of the world. This is the global share. It's been increasing. So in the Allende years, they produced 11%. By 2011, they're producing 32%. In comparison, OPEC, the Organization of Producing Oil Producing Countries, 11 countries produce about 37% of the world's oil. Chile, just one country, produces 32%. So that, you know, we all talk about OPEC as being this horrible monster that sets up prices, which is not true. In actual fact, what sets the prices are the stock exchanges. Yeah. So the importance of copper to the Chilean economy and to the world economy is, you know, has to be looked at, has to be recognized, and also we can see basically that the regime used that it was a rentier state in the classical sense of the word. Okay, so try to ignore all of the lines. What we're focusing here is the red one, which is the mining inquiry. A lot of foreign direct investment into Chile goes into that sector, into mining. Okay, it produces 60%. 60% of exports in the Chilean economy come from mining. So it's like Australia. It depends a lot on mining. So naturally, a lot of the money that goes into the country goes into mining. But you can see here, this period, foreign direct investment, Pinochet wasn't able to attract a lot. It's only until the end of his period that we start to see some credible attraction of foreign direct investment. So not even that. It was not even able to do that. Now, this is a different numbers. These are when you're looking at distribution of resources, distribution of income, distribution of consumption. This is one way of measuring it. Okay, is one way of saying how much people are getting. The point out here, the first one, number one, is the lowest one, the poorest people. So if you get a bunch of people and divide them by 5 equally, you know, based on their consumption levels, and then you say the lowest is number 1, this is how much they're getting, and then 2, 3, 4, and number 5 is the richest. And you can see there, in 1969, 44.5% of consumption was being consumed by the richest. That went up. By 1998, that had gone up to 54.9. So they were consuming more. Inversely, the poorest were consuming less. Okay, so eating less, consuming less. Yeah. So that's not because people don't want to eat, it's because they cannot afford to eat, okay, because of the economic policy. It's not because they're on a diet, that's for sure. And this is another graph that shows you the family allowances and public social expenditure. As you can imagine, in a dictatorial regime that is anti-poor, you will find that family allowances basically dropped from, well, the base year is 1970s at 100%. By 1989 at 28.5. And similarly with public social expenditure, which includes healthcare, education, housing, and social security, they all dropped. Graham is going to show you, Robert is going to show you a photo of a hospital, a couple of hospitals to demonstrate that. These are real wages. Real wages are a measure of how much people are getting, minus the inflation, because the inflation tends to erode wages. And you can see there that, yes, it's true, because of a capital strike, because of flight of capital, because of strikes against Allende, some of those wages went down during his administration. But the regime, the Pinochet regime, didn't do anything to pick them up. He was relying on the fact that they were low to continue his economic policies. So he didn't do anything to, and they just increased naturally, because the more economic production you have, the more the wages are going to increase. But it was not it was not a spectacular increase. Yeah. Okay, I'm racing through this now. This is the wage share of GDP. As you know, when we're counting the GDP, we have three different sources that we're counting. Companies need to pay their workers. The companies themselves need to make a profit, and they need to pay taxes to the government. So those are the three elements. So this is a kind of a measure of distribution. If the GDP is swayed towards the workers, then the wage share is going to be high. In countries, the OECD countries, that ranges between 60 and 70%. So high wage countries as well. That's why we earn how much we earn here in Australia. If it's swayed against the workers, then you get a low wage situation, as in most third world countries. And this is what the situation is in Chile at the moment. You have, in the 1970s, it was closer to a developed country, and with this new regime, you see a drop in those wages, and they never go up again. I have to see the figures from 2003 to 2013, but I'm not surprised if they haven't grown, if they've gone down, if they haven't increased. They have increased, sorry. And again, these are more recent figures. You can see the distribution, the wages to workers, profits to companies, and taxes to the state. In 2003, wages are 41% of GDP. By 2006, 34%. So basically, the wage element in the GDP is decreasing. It means that the workers are getting less and less, whereas companies are getting more and more, 46, 49, 51, 53%. Okay? So there is a redistribution of wealth from the workers to companies. Okay? And if you look at the mining sector, it's even more, it's horrible. Look at the wages, 18%, 11%, 5.4%. The GDP of the mining sector. In other words, companies are getting 94.4% of what is produced. Okay? So this is what we talk about, super profits and what have you. What happens to these profits? So you can see why, you know, the production, the percentage share of corporate production is growing up. You know, the foreign companies are a big element now in the Chilean mining landscape. This is another way of representing that fact. These are all different mines in their countries and different operations. So forget about Chilean nationalization of copper. It's gone. There is no. Yep.
Sorry, which one's BHP in there?
BHP is, let's see. BHP owns. Yes, Condida.
La Condida, 1, 2, 3, the fourth from the bottom.
Saldivar, I think.
Saldivar. The fourth. The fourth. 1, 2, 3, fourth. And Saldivar.
Yeah.
So it's about the median.
Yeah, that big guy.
The pale blue in the middle there.
Yeah. So it's a big investment. Yeah.
Oh, just before you go on, go back to the slide, sorry. The bottom part of Codelco?
That's Codelco. That's
Yeah.
the state-owned company.
Yes, that's where the military invest their pension funds.
Yeah. So Codelco is state-owned, but basically it's a fund for the military. The connection.
For the soldiers.
I don't want to be crude, but that's the connections are too strong to ignore. Yeah. Okay, so I'll just have 2 slides. These are the remittances. So before I show you that there was, you know, big investment, foreign direct investment coming in, $30 billion in the mining sector from 1974 to 2012. $30 billion coming into the country, but how much is going out? Just in 2006, $25 billion being repatriated. So foreign companies don't do this thing for free. They need to get their money out, so they do it.
In fact, that 1 year, the profits repatriated, in other words, taken outside of Chile by the foreign companies, is more than the entire taxes they paid from 1974 to 2006 inside Chile.
Wow.
How does that compare with investment in us? Oh, if you don't mind me, sorry, well, maybe later.
Yeah, so I think I thought that I had another slide, but yes, that's
Close this.
These are 2 sets of photographs that I took last year in Santiago. One easily, one not very easily. This is the grand project for a huge public hospital around the San Miguel area, a poor area in Santiago. It was well and truly under construction when the coup took place, and it was deliberately not only stopped but left there in its decrepit state as a symbol of supposedly what happens to governments which have socialist intentions. The next one, please, is from a series of shots I took of the military hospital in upmarket Santiago, just in the fold of the Andes mountains in a gorgeous tree-lined street-style suburb. So this is the hospital treatment that the military and the very rich, who are more often than not, one way or another, linked to the military, get. We think that encapsulates what we've been on about. Forgive us for going over time. Have we got 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
I'll just check outside, but I'll start by thanking our presenters today. It's not a crime to go over time, that's all right. I'll just check to see if there's another group coming afterwards. If you'd like to take it.
Yeah, can we ask you a question? There was a gentleman that economics, later in economics.
Oh, yeah, look. I'm totally naive on all of this, and history and economics and so on. But look, just you're talking there about one of your last slides about the remittances. Yeah, as a proportion. I mean, can you just give an idea how Australia stands with remittances? I mean, because I gather that we only have royalties, but don't pay. But you know, overseas entities may not be paying taxes as such. In Australia, but just pay royalties to the state. You know, so foreign investors here with their 49% of a whole bunch of mines. You know, I mean, how different is it, in other words, just to give me a clue?
I don't have the figures at hand, sorry, but well, the majority of mining companies in Australia are foreign. So, but I don't know. Do you know? No.
They're not nationalised anyway.
Yeah,
they're Australian.
They're not nationalised. So
it's things like BHP is the world's biggest mining company. BHP Billiton.
It's not we don't. It's not ours.
No, so it's part, the Billiton part is British and the BHP is Australian.
What about TIS? Are they
RTZ and things like that.
TIS are partly foreign owned now since the TIS brothers TIS, T-H-I-S. It used to be TIS brothers.
I don't know.
But anyway, if I may ask just another, like, I haven't quite caught on to what's the imperialism part. I understand sort of what you said about the Secret Service and Bond, who was, you know, sheer scum in many different ways. But, you know, aren't capitalists allowed to sort of go overseas, get cheap labour and do all that sort of thing?
The point here is that there's an inseparable relationship between the country being open to investment and the terrorist state. It simply wasn't possible. The project of the socialist government of Allende was to let the Chileans decide what they wanted to do with the country. All Chileans, not only the rich. What's happened as a result of the terrorist state being implemented is that only a handful of Chileans decide, and they're the ones who are the inheritors of the colonial state. They're the neo-colonial class, and they happily throw the country open to be devastated by predators, foreign predators, at the expense of the great majority of Chileans, as Vladimir's diagrams have shown. The share of public wealth and private wealth in the country has been decimated, but it was only possible to do this as a result of imperialism setting up the terrorist state. And I tried, however imperfectly, to historicise that process.
I mean, I'm not totally trying to, you know, naively suggest to the contrary as to what you're saying, but didn't, but don't the Chilean authorities, I mean, they bear responsibility for continuing apparently this legal regime that means that, you know, foreigners can own a high percentage of the enterprise.
Well, it's actually an illegal regime because it's built on the 1980 Constitution, which was run by the dictatorship, where approximately 107% of the population voted, including a whole number of dead people. So it's an utterly unconstitutional constitution, and one of the struggles at the moment in the country is to overthrow and replace the illegal constitution with a legal one, which is truly democratic. For example, I think 1/3 of the Senate is still appointed. 1/3 of the Senate is not voted on. They're just allocated, and most of them are allocated to military officers.
But what I'm getting at is,
sustains this system, essentially.
So
it's a civilian military dictatorship of forms right now.
But I suppose what I'm trying to suggest is that capitalism will go to these places. So to what extent do you call it, you know, imperial as opposed to just capitalist? I mean, we have a lot of laws in Australia to stop unbridled exploitation. And Chile doesn't, and that's right. But I mean,
a number of countries have security, MI6 for Britain and CIA with America. Well, the US State Department is hand in hand with big companies. Part of its foreign policy is big companies. So what we're trying to point out here that Australia doesn't really associate that our equivalent is doing the same type of thing over here. You know, like ASIS is involved in Southeast Asia back from the 50s, destabilising governments and whatever else. and to make it right for foreign investment, which means Australian investment. In the case of Chile in the late 80s, by Chile being removed from US preferences, it means that US companies weren't likely to invest in Chile. Australia was hand over fist. And it's not just the tax rates, it's also the tax write-offs, depreciation rates are really high for mining companies. So they might complain, oh, we're paying 40% tax, back then it's about 35. But on top of that, you have all these tax write-offs. So like under the Bush government administration, the top 300 companies in America paid no taxes because of depreciation allowances.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, sorry, I forgot your name. Have we got documents that give evidence of Australia's intelligence complicity in the coup? And has WikiLeaks provided any particular light on this?
I think the answer is yes and yes. Brian Tuohy's book called Oyster, although it's 20 years old and although it was heavily edited and written in a quite curious arrangement with the Department of Foreign Affairs, I think, where they had the right to censor material in his book, is nevertheless a pretty reasonable factual demonstration of the leaks. And there are other documents around that WikiLeaks has published rather late. I have to say I think WikiLeaks' role in all this has occasionally been overblown. There are other documents that clearly associate the CIA with ASIS with the Chilean military at around that time, and we make it quite clear that ASIS had a small but significant role in that, and that the role didn't stop as Whitlam claimed. It continued. And eventually Clive Cameron came out and stated that.
If you go to the National Archives and just type in Hope Report, Justice Hope Report.
Sorry?
If you go to the National Archives on the web,
Yes.
and just type in Hope Report, it'll bring up.
That was the commission inquiry that
Yeah.
And there are plenty in the US National Archives. Do you have more questions?
Just a comment. You mentioned about people from both people who were coming in theory to us and also to Australia, and also people who basically infiltrated through the Pinochet regime. When I was teaching in ESL, and I don't want to go into too much detail and identify anybody or anything, but students used to come to class at the beginning of the year and have a very cautious look around to see who was in the class. And I remember one particular man who was very traumatised, coming very, very early and sort of hanging around just to make sure there was nobody there that he would fear. And he was one example, but other teachers compared notes.
Sorry, where was that?
I don't want to identify
no,
a
but
particular area.
but
It
you're
was
saying
actually in Brisbane.
in Australia, in Britain. Sorry, okay, gotcha. So, could I ask on that? Oh,
Yeah, I had a similar anecdote to that, two different anecdotes. I worked in the community sector in Sydney in the 80s and also was involved in Latin American solidarity and had very close connections with the Salvadoran community in Sydney. And through my work, often I needed to refer clients to an organisation that was for torture and trauma victims.
In Brisbane too.
No,
a
yeah,
lot of them were clients of
And
theirs.
the thing was, one of the, had been referring to the Salvadoran clients there, and then I got word from a Chilean comrade who said that one of the social workers that was employed by staff was a torturer who'd been involved in the torturing and interviewing. And so we were able to, that woman was identified within the Latin American community, so that after that, through my networks professionally, we tried to funnel clients to another organisation where it wasn't necessarily for Latinos.
Yes.
The other thing in relation to the Australian security role in the 60s and 70s, I worked in the Commonwealth Public Service in Canberra in immigration, and one of my friends who was head of the branch, the humanitarian branch, said that he knew that the immigration officers, like in the various embassies around the world, there'd be foreign affairs officers, trade officers, immigration officers, etc., and there were usually security ones, but the immigration officer was in fact, even though he was an employee of the immigration department, was actually a spy and reported, and had his reports going back to immigration, but he also had this other sort of thing through to ASIS.
There are a couple more questions. So, I was going to say,
yeah, I just, I'm not going to talk about anyone else, I'm going to talk about myself, what's happening here. When I came to Australia as a political refugee, after being released, being tortured and all going through, I had an interview with the Australian ambassador and the embassy in Chile. I had to sign a contract that I was not going to be involved in politics in Australia, and otherwise I could be deported immediately.
Yeah.
When I came here, and I was settled here in Brisbane, I was given a house, the government gave me somewhere, good now or whatever, and I had a visit about 3 weeks later for the second agent, and they identified themselves as the ASIS, or whatever it's called, and said, well, we just come to see how you are, and you never forget about the contract you signed at the embassy in Chile. Well, that's the conditions you have to find this country. So that's my own story.
Wow, that's incredible.
Well, I guess a little bit of a comment and then also a question, because I think obviously I'm relatively young. My interest in history is from the perspective of a history student and a student activist today.